My journey to the Women's Center. I knew of the Women's Center before I really got super involved, I think via some other things I was doing in the city. I knew some people I played feminist basketball with some people from a like a DIY kind of space called Gal Palace, and some of those people were really involved with the Women's Center. So Young in particular, I think was like one of the sort of earlier core members, and I had gone to some of So Young's events at the space, and like an event or two. But I really got involved in early 2017 when I organized an intersectional brunch before the Women's March Los Angeles. There's just like a group of us were kind of just like sitting around like making fun of the sort of the way that the march was being organized and how apolitical it was, and like explicitly nonpartisan, which we thought was ridiculous. And so we just like decided to have like a little event where we had made all these posters and where people brought food, and we had zines we were passing out about intersectional feminism. And then people started to donate different things to the event, and then Sarah Williams reached out to us via Facebook and asked if she could donate some money to it. And I didn't know Sarah, but I definitely knew of Sarah enough that I was like, oh my God, Sarah, like Sarah Williams just DM'd me or whatever. And then shortly after that, I guess the Women's Center released like their call for programming residents for the spring 2017 quarter. The theme was coalitions. And so like the three of us, it was me and my friend Phoebe Winter and Coco Kim. We didn't really have like a name per se, but people, because of the signs that we had made, people started calling us Intersectionality Now. So like the three of us kind of under that name applied for the residency, got the residency. And then that was kind of my first time, I think that was all of our first time like doing so many programs, that we did 12 programs over the course of the quarter. So I remember working really closely with mostly Sarah and Em to execute, and to some extent Salima as well, to execute those programs. And kind of like Sarah was really sort of counseling us on like how to sort of execute them well. And then at the same time, like we were kind of coming in that same political moment of like early 2017, many conversations about feminism were taking place. And I think like our INOS thing kind of like evolved to be something like we're interested in introducing conversations into mainstream or broader feminism that like we think that should be taking place. And so a lot of the programs that we had were like that. We had a program that a lot of them are sort of kind of like loosely, sometimes explicitly, but sometimes loosely in conversation with the Women's March. So but alongside doing the programs, we also had a lot of like critical energy about the Women's Center itself. Like kind of what I knew about it, despite the fact that a woman of color did introduce me to the space, like I did think of it as kind of like a white feminist space. Like that was sort of, I didn't know that much. I didn't really know who worked there before I met the staff on the residency. And so we also just were sort of talking about like why the space felt or did not feel inclusive to different groups of people, what kinds of things like we thought like needed to happen in like the leadership or the structure of the organization to sort of make that more likely. We had a series of events. I think it was called Taking Up All the Space, and it was just like Black women and women of color coming to the space and sort of talking about like what they would like to see there that would make it sort of feel like a space where they would want to be more invited to participate. And then some of those conversations, I feel like there were a couple of times where we had like meetings with Em and Sarah. We were sort of asking them about the organizational stuff, and one where we were asking them about like their core values and what their core values stood for, and just kind of having them explain a little bit. And I always like say, I remember in that meeting saying, I feel like there should be a woman of color in leadership at this organization. Like explain like why there isn't a leader of color here. Like our energy was like kind of it was a little bit aggro, like and so it's just I never would have guessed that like I might become that woman of color like maybe 6 months later. But we at the end of the residency, the position of programming coordinator was announced, and by that fall I had taken that role. It started off as programming and outreach coordinator. Because the outreach kind of was a lot of what I now have been doing as far as like just trying to connect with like different audiences that weren't necessarily super tapped in, and trying to like bring those groups of people together. Then it evolved over time for me. I guess at one point I was like, I'm gonna call myself the programming director, because I was sort of like Em and I worked really closely for a while, but I think as your role evolved, I kind of became like a one-person department to some extent. And then later had some Getty interns help out, but at one point I kind of developed like a sort of system for interviewing programmers and that kind of thing. So And also the artist in residence program was also evolving, kind of like Sarah was evolving it alongside my role. And so over time, what I was doing as far as like establishing programming themes and thinking of what kinds of programs to do were also, those programs were usually in conversation with some artists in residence. So the artist in residence in the fall of 2018 was Sarita Doherty, and the programming theme was unschooling. And it was related to Sarita's project. Her installation project was called the DIY PhD, and it was like people who were kind of just wanting to work outside of like academic institutions on a particular subject. And the other programs were about just like different ways of kind of like alternative learning, or like learning outside of conventional ways, or kind of like co-teaching, like all that kind of stuff. There were conversations also about like in the array of programs that we're doing, wanting to also provide a set of like different tools that we felt like people could use in their their anti-oppressive praxis, I guess you could say. So I'm trying to I couldn't think of like what other programs that sort of fell into that category, but I think a few things came up. You know, like maybe like basic autocare might be a thing where it's like, oh, this is a life skill that we think people should have, you know. But I was kind of looking for other kinds of skills, like in the realm of facilitation or in the realm of like interpersonal dynamics that I also felt like would be useful. So when Meenadchi applied, or I found this application for a DNVC workshop, I didn't know that much about I knew of NVC. I didn't know of DNVC. Obviously, it's Meenadchi's concept. But I was definitely interested in that kind of thing being a sort of program that we would do, and also I was really interested in having I think we also were talking about when I started, there were like programs almost every night, and I tried to have fewer and fewer of them, so we were talking also a lot about like quality over quantity, and how can we have programs that people can kind of deepen their experience and deepen their relationship both to like the people in the workshops and to the space. And so Meenadchi was proposing a 10-week experience that I was really intrigued by. So I do remember like Meenadchi coming into the office and kind of like pitching the idea to me, and I did later find out that they had never done the workshop before. It wouldn't have been an issue if I had known that. It certainly was not an issue because I decided to staff the workshop, and so I also was a participant in the workshop. So it definitely wasn't a factor, the fact that you've never done it before.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, it wasn't, because I think, you know, even as I was coming into, so for me, nonviolent communication had been part of my individual practice since 2002. But it was only in December of 2017 that I made the decision to start facilitating more concretely. And I was facilitating in other ways because I was I was the crisis programs director at prior to moving back to LA and at the Rape Crisis Center where I was working. So a lot of the skills were coming in and I was training people, but I wasn't actively promoting myself or putting myself out there as a nonviolent communication facilitator per se. And then when I made the decision to start doing that, it was out of the awareness of just the ways I had been gatekept from naming my magic or being able to say this is a thing that I do and this is a thing that I'm good at. And so even when I applied to the Women's Center, I had run some programs. I had run day-long workshops and I had run a 4-week series, but I hadn't done anything like what I was pitching and proposing at the Women's Center. And so it was this blend of how much am I lying so you know what I mean? Versus how much am I amplifying and boosting and moving into my magic with that type of, not fake it till you make it, but make it because you are made to make it type energy.
I love that.
Yeah, thanks. My first interactions with NK, like everybody's gonna have a different narrative, right? You know what I mean? But my experience of NK was that she just exuded and still exudes, you know, just a lot of clarity and like so much like beauty in a lot of different ways. I had never been to an NVC space that was primarily BIPOC or that was only BIPOC. And so I was almost kind of really scared to set that container because I was like, well, what if people don't want to come? Or I don't know, just all the things that get internalized. And NK was like, you know, if you want that, you should do that. And it's not even like, what if people don't want to come? I was like afraid of being exclusionary. And NK really just insisted. She was like, no, if that is what you want, then that is what you should do. And it felt really good to have that quality of like programming advocacy and programming and support, like somebody who was like really intentional about like, okay, what is it that you as a facilitator want and need to like help this run smoothly or help have your vision of the program. And I feel like that really continued because NK had just like this really supportive vibe of like always being present when I needed something to sort of set up, and also being willing to just kind of like peace out and bounce, like I'll be here if you need me, please ask for support, and also if you don't need me, then I'll just be here, which was really nice.
It felt like an honor too that you would think that I could support you. I remember the time just being like, what? like, yes, I have to like rise to this occasion somehow.
But also, this is like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like this is like the, you know how like each sign has their like strength and their flaw, you know what I mean? And like Libras out here consistently underselling themselves. I'm like, do you know how fucking deep and brilliant? Like, I don't know, we're the whole ocean, like the expanse of the universe. I don't know.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I feel like Libras they like to fawn. Yeah. It's also the kind of job that like evokes like a lot of personal transformation. I think maybe if you want that to be the case, and I think most people did. And so
I remember I think it was the second workshop. I had like offered to give NK, you know, I was like, would you like a hug? And NK was very clear that the answer was no. And I was like, love it, love a good boundary. Love the precision of that no. And I was like, okay. And of course, you know, things have evolved in so many different directions, and so many layers and levels of intimacy. Because I was like, yeah, we're friends. I'm also a Cancer, so I would be like, we're friends. Again, as soon as we meet, we'll share a bag of Doritos together.
I remember the first time you called me. The first time you called me, I did that thing where I was like, oh! And I threw my phone across. Not because of you, just because of like my weird, my Scorpio boundaries. That's and then I called you back, obviously. Yeah, that's my energy for sure. Yes, like I love thinking back to that time and that container, both because of how much I admired how you facilitate. I think it's very obvious, you're a very skilled facilitator. You're really skilled at holding space. You're really skilled at communicating things in a way that feels accessible. But also, like I remember at the end, like one of like my favorite moments I looked back on, like when I was like, oh, this is like when I knew that I loved Meenadchi, the facilitator. Because at that point I was like, we're not friends yet. But there was a moment, I don't know what exactly we were talking about, but there was a moment where, you know, because like the cohort that I was part of, there was it was very juicy. There was a lot of deep stuff. There was a lot of deep flow. It was a vibe for sure. And it got emotional for lots of different people at different times, myself included many times. And so I'm not sure exactly what was happening, but I imagine it was something along those lines. Like someone in the room like needed something. And Meenadchi said, I'm not sure, just like very calmly said, I'm not sure what to do now, and just sat down. And then the room was like kind of quiet, and then not for very long, like maybe like 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and then someone in the space offered something to that person and someone else offered something. And so I just thought it was a really beautiful example of, like, I had, at that point I had limited experience or training with this. I had taken like a facilitation workshop at the Allied Media Conference, so I knew like certain things. I had been told about certain things, but it was, to me, that was such a beautiful example of seeing like co-facilitation in action and seeing you embody exactly what you just described, like the way that you then and continue, like the way that I know you is that you do honor that everyone has something that really valuable to offer, and that everyone contains these same abilities, and that sometimes it's just you're called to do it at different moments. Yeah, I miss that space, honestly.
Yeah.
Some of us, maybe 6. I think one thing also is at the workshop, maybe it was 6 weeks in the beginning, and it got extended. Maybe half the class decided to continue for another 4 weeks, and then after that 6 of us continued meeting up once a month for probably another 4 or 5 months, and just doing, and it was I just thought it's such a valuable, now that some time has passed, I can see even more the value of like both like the skills that we were learning and also just like those relationships. Obviously, like, you're such a significant relationship in my life now. You know, we did eventually become, I feel like we went from, I would call Meenadchi my teacher friend for a while. And I think now I'm only moving away from that only because I'm taking taking cues from you about like, I guess like seeing my own leadership in the same spaces and not needing to put you on a pedestal, which I also learned a lot about from you. Those meetings, we would meet up at someone's house. We kind of rotated hosting, and usually what we would do is kind of we would use definitely different exercises that we had done in the larger series. And so I remember, I can think back to the first one. It was at Tracy's house, who's Meenadchi's roommate now, but everyone just kind of went around the circle and sort of checked in, like where they're coming from, where they're at, how they're feeling, what they're arriving with. And then I think we just asked the group, like, does anyone have a situation, a question or a situation or something that you are trying to work through? It didn't have to be a conflict, just like a thing that you'd like to talk out or sort of, or, you know, work on together. And then people would ask for, sometimes people would ask for like a specific thing. Like one person was like, I would like to role play this conversation that I want to have with, I think it was someone that they were romantically entangled with, but like a situation that they needed to navigate that was sort of unusual. Other times people would make suggestions. Like there was another time when I had an interaction with someone over the weekend and I was like really mad about it. And in the moment I didn't really say anything. I didn't really kind of like advocate for myself, and I was like feeling away about that. And so, you know, the group was kind of like, what do you need? Like, do you want to do, like one person was basically volunteers, like, why don't you pretend that I'm that person and like say to me all the things you want to say to her? And because at that time I was really, and something like a big thing that came out of my experience in the workshop was just my relationship to anger and expressing anger. Kind of like the most significant moment for me in the series had revolved around that. So even after the fact, I was still really working on that. And so, you know, these people having been with me for 10 weeks, like knew that about me. They at this point, they know lots of things about me and like why that might be the case. And so it was so nice. Like everyone was very accommodating. I was kind of like, oh, I don't know, like that. Even that seems like, I was like, I don't really want to yell at you, like, or I don't want to say these things to you. It just feels like to me. And then she was like, why doesn't everyone else leave the room and like just you and I will be in here and you can say whatever you want. And so everyone else just like stood outside the apartment for maybe like 15 minutes, and I just like said all this. I just kind of like word vomited all the stuff at her, and you know, it took me a while to get going. And she was like really being like, yeah, like give it to me. Like I really want, like I can handle it. I can hold this, you know. And so, and that was it. And it was just like, it was such a nice, like, you know, like I just really, even just now remembering, I feel like I got lighter. I felt that weight of it, and I felt lighter speaking about it. But you know, that's what I mean also by that cohort, just like the level of generosity, empathy, and also just like intuition. Like people just sort of like were really in tune with each other and knowing what someone might need, and also really, really good at asking questions. I mean, like, you also know what you need. Why don't you tell us what you need? You know, like, I don't know. I just cannot understate like how impactful that experience was. Like it really, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it was life altering. I really feel that it was. To experience that in community, I think is also like really very different than experiencing it like with your therapist or something.
Yeah.
To your face, what are you thinking?
So many things. I was thinking that it was life altering for me as well. And, it was such a beautiful space. And then I was thinking that, these are things that you can't experience in a therapist's office because there are things that are happening in collective. Like, I keep saying this, but it's just different when you have 15 people who are willing to show up for your healing process. Like, we don't have access to that often. People don't dream about that, or you know what I mean? And so it is so different. And the thing is about when 15 people show up to participate and support one person's healing process, it's healing for everybody. Because one, there's parallels in our processes, and two, we are reminded that it's possible. And I am also savoring in the glow of that, the autonomy, right? Of Anisha to be great, everybody else leave the room. And everybody being great, this is what NK needs for NK's process, for us to be standing outside his fucking door and just be waiting for when it's done. How lovely is that? It's so lovely.
Yeah, it was. I did go on to make a 3-part audio series not about my experiences in DNVC, but that writing project was sparked by a particular experience in DNVC, which I then recreated with Meenadchi's help and with the help of another participant in the workshop. It's kind of like an audio documentary, audio essay, sound poem. It's not really. I mean, it's what I set out to do was document, like I said, a healing process, and so. I wanted it to be very non-linear and sort of associative, the way that I think the healing work happens. But that project started because there was this day in NVC we were talking about shame and rage, and I think Meenadchi asked us. We had there was kind of a section of class where we were talking about shame, and there was a section of class where we were talking about rage, and to me they didn't strike me as particularly related, which now it just seems so obviously related, but at the time I was I don't see why these things are connected. But we went outside and so a lot of the times in class we'd have sort of there'd be some discussion periods. Sometimes Meenadchi would kind of be teaching us different concepts, and then we would also have usually some kind of time to practice those concepts and also some sort of somatic exercise. So the rage part was a somatic exercise, and the idea was you would push on Meenadchi, we went out to the parking lot at night. You push on Meenadchi, kind of into, I guess for a certain period of time, there's someone keeping time, someone who's kind of supporting Meenadchi's body. And Meenadchi had asked beforehand, who wanted to participate in it. And I think I was sort of I don't really know if I was I don't know if I want to do that. I think I asked what normally happens, and they said people have different kinds of releases, and people sometimes make noise or cry or whatever. And I was all of that displays of that kind of vulnerability at that time to me were just ugh. I was just no, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in being one of those people. But Meenadchi did whatever. The invitation was still there even when the time came, and so we did the exercise, and I feel nothing really happened in particular. I didn't have a release in the moment, but when I got home that night, I sat in my car outside my apartment for maybe an hour or two, and just just writing tons of notes on my phone, just all these memories that came up, all these things about my mom that I had remembered, all these things about basically growing up in really small, very white communities in the South. Being a black girl in very white schools, things about my mom, that her navigating that world and sort of her survival strategies that now I hadn't really revisited since I was younger, that now as an adult I remembered, just poured out of me, and that then became later on this audio series. So there is an episode that Meenadchi appears in where we kind of are recreating that workshop, and I'm talking about, I have an interview with someone in the class who had offered some feedback about, or some reflections about motherhood, about just sort of the things that like, I guess she was talking about sort of mothers and women and the things that like women of color I think have to sort of like suppress just for survival, and those things then get passed down to us, but then we have these opportunities to do like this healing work, and it's sort of, you know, when you say like you're healing generations like forward and backwards, like that kind of thing. So that's what the project, to me, that's what the project is about, is that healing forwards and backwards. And then I think also later I had a series of Valentine's Day events, and I wanted to connect some of the things I learned in DNVC in particular. I think this is like I feel like this is now has become sort of like a mainstream concept, like in the pandemic, but the pod mapping was something that we talked about in DNVC, where I remember like Meenadchi drawing on the board, like here's you in the middle, and here's all the people that you know, and like a lot of times people relate where it's like 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 to 1, like rays coming out of a sun to each individual node person, which that resonated for me. And then they were kind of, and it seems like so obvious, they were sort of like, but it's kind of like, imagine if you have like a network of people who all are sort of interblockingly know each other. And so I like took that to I actually had a Sunday afternoon barbecue at my house for the purposes of explaining to my friend group the concept of pods and pod mapping. So I kind of became like the kind of parlance in our friend circle, and like a project that we then like took on in like our friend group. But I also thought I also saw a lot of parallels between that and some of my interest in my own personal critiques of monogamy and interest in ethical or consensual non-monogamy. And so Meenadchi and I did a panel about that, even though they were then and apparently still are monogamous, but I learned recently. Nonetheless, they had a lot of really amazing insights to share with regards to just sort of how I do think that like non-monogamy is very much related to like a decolonial praxis of like, you know, questioning certain power structures or certain assumptions that we have. I don't know if I should pause. Do you have anything to add?
I would like to say that in defense of monogamy, not in defense of like monogamy as like a...
It's not the time. It's not the time. Meenadchi, read the room.
I think like, you know, it's like how do you assess your needs, and then what are the strategies, you know what I mean, that you're using to get your needs met, right? It's like it's not about any particular form or any particular container.
I totally agree.
But I will just say, we don't hold hands enough, right? Like, we don't hold hands enough with enough people. We don't hold hands with our neighbors. We don't hold hands with we just don't hold hands enough. And like some of those things are outside. They're like intimacy isn't a construct that belongs to monogamy or polyamory. That's like a life skill. It's like a way of being, and like analyzing and exploring what are the ways that we get the needs for intimacy met.
100%. Yeah, I think I sometimes I feel like I will say like consensual non-monogamy, I'll kind of throw it out as if that explains what I mean, but yeah, what you were speaking about is like really where I was coming from. Like the project that I had been doing in my personal life was the idea that like intimacy should not be hoarded. Like it is a resource that is abundant and it should be treated as such. And you know, like for me that kind of like led me to think about like flattening hierarchies among my relationships, because that was something that for me, the way I've experienced monogamy culture was like, in this container of this relationship you get to experience X, Y, and Z. Whereas, I think like even, you know, like in the series, it's sort of like, no, like vulnerability is not just for, you know, this group of people or this one person. It's a practice you can take into all of your relationships, and intimacy is that as well. Yeah. So that's exactly that. Like I think like that's where I saw that we were like on the same page, and I really liked the way that you were talking about it, and I just really liked like the analysis you were bringing to where it met my analysis. I really just loved that kind of intersection, and so that was kind of like where the idea came from for that conversation. Which it was great. Yeah, we have it on tape somewhere. But I just remember there were so many moments where the room was like, like Meenadchi was just like dropping gems. The third collaboration, and probably the most important one, is this book. I think one of those amazing projects that just sort of was sprouting at the time that Meenadchi was kind of joined the organization, or you know, like became part of like the sort of broader community, was that MJ, our design fellow, decided for their design project to start a press. And so in brainstorming like what people who are already involved with the Women's Center might be great people to tap to write a book, I obviously, maybe it's not obvious, but I definitely thought of Meenadchi because I had had that transformative experience, and just thought that the skills that I had learned were so valuable that I was like, I feel so strongly that like we need to be part of like disseminating this information to as many people as possible, which is also a big part of the conversations we were having about like so-called exportable models. I'm like doing quotation marks, you know, just like the things that kind of like wanting to sort of disseminate our values or whatever. I also really love, I think part of the project the Women's Center also is like people who, like Meenadchi said, like people who are not fake it till you make it, but who are like, well, I don't know how you phrased it, but who are kind of like becoming something, like have an idea that they're kind of like, I can't actualize this, I just need a space in which to do it. You know, and like kind of like blowing those people up and just being like, well, how can we put some energy behind those people's careers and their past and support what their projects are. So I asked Meenadchi, like, are you interested in writing a book? They said, I think yes, without hesitation. And then I remember telling Sarah, like, I don't even know, I've never even read anything that Meenadchi's written. Like, can Meenadchi even write a book? Like, it didn't even occur to me to even ask that question. So I was like, I guess we're gonna find out, like, what kind of writer they are. Turns out they are a writer and a beautiful writer, and turned around a draft like I think you were in Sri Lanka and you like wrote a draft in Google Docs in like a week or something. It was pretty fast. And we just got go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say we just got finished editing and designing the second edition after printing I don't know how many copies, like 5,000 copies or something. Like it's really, like I was like, obviously this book is amazing. Obviously the work that Meenadchi's doing is so valuable and amazing, but I definitely would not have anticipated just how hungry people would be for this kind of medicine, I guess you could call it.
I think this is the thing that I'm like constantly navigating now, in the sense of, you know, anything that has to do with decoloniality never, like it can't be owned by one person, right? It just has always existed. I was listening to my friends Katie and Leah did a really beautiful IG Live recently around the concept of harm. And one of the things that Katie said was, they were like, you know, decoloniality has existed as long as colonialism has existed. Because as soon as like those colonial endeavors kind of like hit the land, like a response was already being activated and in place. So I feel like with the book and with the workshops and everything, you know, decolonizing nonviolent communication in many ways I think has gotten like ascribed to me, but it's not mine. You know, and the concept even, you know, it came to me from my teacher because of the work that she really led in our homeland and the ways that the patterns of how she saw nonviolent communication as a modality, reinforcing white supremacy and reinforcing colonialism, which is sort of inevitable because the modality itself was developed by a cis white guy. So there's things that are just kind of get embedded in the practice if you don't have intentionality. So yeah, just that like it is a practice. It's part of my practice, and it's also everybody's practice. I think my favorite thing about the book is the way that it has supported the press to then uplift and highlight so many other voices. Because the book is doing is financially doing well, then there's just more spaciousness for the press to be able to invest in other authors to amplify and uplift. And I love, you know, doing boosts on my social media, being like, you should check out all of these other people that we have at the press. Because I think that intentional web is so nice.
I love that. Well said.
And NK was such a powerful steward of the work. I think something that I have received from NK is, I mean, like, it's two things really. One, it's like just this love of like luxuriating beauty and aesthetic and being able to move in slower and deeper ways to actually appreciate the depth of beauty that is present. And the other piece is like, yeah, that feels like a big thing. And the other piece is like just an increasing love of boundaries and boundary work. Because, you know, when NK asked me to do the book, I said, okay. I said, okay. And then I like, you know, just wrote it in the middle of the night when the internet was fastest, because I was in Sri Lanka at the time. And then, yeah, we came back and then we kind of sent it off to press. And the first one had 200 copies, and we just thought that would last forever. And it didn't, and it hasn't. And even in this last round of editing, you know, up until the very end, NK kept advocating for things of like, here's how to make the book more beautiful, here's how to make the content more cogent, here's how to like amplify, reshape, etc. Which was so helpful and necessary. You know, one of the things that we talked about last time, that was one of my favorites that I learned from NK, was the concept of sunsetting and like allowing things to run a particular course. And, you know, which for me as a Cancer, I'm like, never. Like, well, relationships last forever, things last, you know what I mean? And like, that's just how I operate. I don't operate with the end in mind, because there is no end, and there isn't. But also, and even that even kind of like ties into the book, because people are always like, how do we do that? Or how do I, you know what I'm like, dude, I don't know. Like, this book just happened from the magic. And I think that for me has probably enabled me to just invest more in the timeliness and the trust of magic, that magic is going to happen. It's going to happen in our relationships. It's going to happen in our environments. It's going to happen within me, within us. And then a moment of magic might pass, and it will rotate, and it will turn into another moment of magic somewhere down the line, if we let it, with all of this history of like that has been imbued and carried with us.